Hi everyone, my name is Miss Magdalene. Let me tell you what you need to know to pass Advanced Audit and Assurance, which is the AAA paper, one of the optional papers of the professional skills level of ACCA. Now, the format of AA has changed since September 2018. So now there are two sections. Section A, there will be one compulsory case that carries 50 marks. And this case study will have a few questions requirements like A, B, C, and it will carry 46 marks out of that 50 marks. And your information will be quite similar to like what you see in the SBL paper. You see a lot of exhibits. They might give you some information about the background of the company. They might give you the financial statement extracts of the company. They might give you some notes of meeting between the audit engagement partner and the client's directors, and etc. etc. And of course, there will be 4 professional marks that will be available in this particular question, where you are required to present your answer in the structure and clarity that is required of ACCA. Now in section B, there will be 2 compulsory questions, 25 marks each, and obviously shorter case scenarios. Now, if you read the examiner's approach to AAA in the ACCA's website, the examiner is very clear because in section A, they will always give you a question set in the planning phase of an audit. Okay, that means they will not go far away from this requirement. So at this planning phase of an audit, you might get questions like, for example, you may be asked to do some form of risk assessment. For example, you could be asked to identify risks of areas in the financial statements that could be misstated. You could be asked to identify audit risks, business risks. And obviously, if there are risks identified in the financial statements, you may need to plan to gather evidence about that area. So you may be asked, what kind of principal audit procedures would you plan to do so that you can reduce that particular risks relating to that area in the financial statements? Now, of course, when you are performing an audit, sometimes, even at the planning stage, you could be asked to deal with ethical matters or even QC matters. Okay, and sometimes the questions may ask you to deal with accepting a new client. So let's say, for example, if that particular client is a new client, they may ask you what needs to be done, what procedures needs to be carried out to assess that risk of that new client. So you may need to know what to answer relating to those issues. Now in section B, according to the examiner's article, there will be at least one question. One of the questions, because remember there are 2 questions, right? So one of the questions may ask you regarding completion stage of the audit. That means what the auditors need to do to complete an audit, the review stage. So for example, the questions may ask you to do a final review of the working papers of that audit team. And you may need to review the working papers in terms of the matters that has been audited by the team and the evidence that has been collected by the team to support the opinion. You may be asked to do a going concern review or a subsequent events review. They may test you on the types of audit reports to be issued, because usually after completion stage, the auditors will have to express their opinion, whether they're going to give a qualified opinion, unqualified opinion, or an adverse or disclaimer of opinion. Now, even in this section, usually when an audit is about to be completed, you might find that the audit engagement partner may have to draft other reports to those charged with governance. So these are other types of reports, like, for example, a management letter regarding the company's internal controls. So what are the areas to be tested in AAA paper? Now, again, AA paper is not too difficult, actually. You will be asked to perform assurance engagements, of course, and one of the most popular assurance engagements that audit firms are providing today is, of course, your external audit. That means the audit of historical information, where you could be asked to audit financial statements of this company. Now, in your earlier level of ACCA, you would have already studied about external audit. So, most importantly, you must know how to conduct such an audit based on ISAs. Like, you need to know how to do planning. You need to know how to do evidence gathering. That's why section A of your exam questions is always like this. You may need to do review and reporting. So review is always the completion stage, and you may need to express your opinion. That's why you have section B questions this way. But most importantly, when you are doing an audit of historical information, there will always be a need to deal with ethical matters because it has to be done in a professional and ethical way. So you may need to be sensitive when you're reading a case study, whether there is any ethical issues, whether there is any regulatory issues that affects the audit, like money laundering aspects. Is there any QC issues regarding that particular audit? Okay, so you must be able to answer questions like this as well. And most of the time, when you're asked to do an audit of financial statements, it could be a single entity, one company, or it can be group audits. Now, this is the one that is challenging, of course, group audits, because there are many things more that you need to know in terms of how to conduct an audit, especially in a group audit situation. Now, to be able to conduct an audit, obviously, when you're an auditor, you need to know your accounting standards, because one of the most important jobs of an external auditor is always to identify risks in the financial statements. So obviously, financial statements will contain a lot of figures, and they are usually financial statements are prepared in accordance with IFRS. Okay, financial statements are prepared in accordance with IFRS, with IAS. So therefore, as an auditor, you have to know the recognition criteria. You need to know how certain figures are measured based on IFRS. So that is why when you do an AA paper, you should at least do your SBR concurrently or SBR before you do your AA. Okay, please do not do AA without SBR knowledge, because you'll be tested on at least 20 different types of accounting standards when it comes to auditing the financial statements of a single entity or a group audit per se. Of course, there are other assignments that you will be tested on. So basically, you would be asked to do audit related or other assurance services like due diligence review. You must know what is a due diligence review. You must know what is a review of interim financial information. You may be asked to do a PFI. So you need to know what is a PFI. You may be asked to do even forensic audits. Okay, so you must be familiar with all these types of different audit-related and other assurance services besides audit of financial statements. And obviously, you also need to consider professional and ethical issues, like just now, what I mentioned under audit of financial statements. But most importantly, you must know how to plan to gather evidence relating to due diligence review, interim financial information, and to know how to discuss the level of assurance that this type of services provides and what kind of wordings do they use in the report. So basically, the examiner just wants you to compare these other assignments with audit of historical information. I think that is their main objective. Okay? But there are also other assignments, like you may be asked to do an audit on the integrated report of a company and a few more other small types of assignments. So likewise, you may need to know how to plan to carry out such an engagement, what procedures needs to be carried out, and what wordings needs to be put inside the reports as well. Okay? Other things that could be tested in your AAA is, of course, current issues. Now, this is more of current issues. Now, current issues is a bit tough to teach. Most of the time, the examiners mention that students need to read up current developments in auditing standards. So this is a very general kind of things where they need to read a lot of technical articles. And you may be asked to even discuss current developments regarding audit methodology, business practices, okay, anything that could impact audit quality. Okay, like even you could be asked about current developments in emerging technologies. Now, that's because in today's world, a lot of audit is affected by technology. There's a lot of what we call softwares used to perform audit. But you may also need to know new technological terms like big data, the use of data analytics, and how it impacts audit and audit quality as well. So this is quite open-ended and not easy to, detect or to even predict whether it's coming out in exams. So most of the time, when lecturers do revision, we usually focus more on the audit of historical information as well as the other assignments part. Okay, but we will give you some, articles to read so that, who knows, if the questions do come out in the AA, at least you could answer. This is probably like 10 marks, okay, in your exams. So what came out in the AA exams in terms of the new format? Now, remember the new format started in September. So if you look at the trend of these AA exams, you can see they have kept to their word as what you read in the examiner's article. Okay, remember what I said in section A, it will always be planning stage. So again, in September 2018, they promised, and it came out this way. So they asked the students to analyze audit risks for 24 marks. But why was the mark so high was because the students were asked to use analytical review. That means you were asked to use this thing called analytical procedures. You had to calculate some ratios, okay, on how to assess audit risks. And of course, like what I mentioned just now, when there is a risks in the financial statements, you could be asked to plan the audit procedures. Now, again, I'm going to teach you some trick or two in the revision class or in the revision course, because there are ways to write out your answers, and there are ways to connect these two together, actually. Okay? And in the September 2018 exams, there was also a 10 marks question asking candidates to review and evaluate specific parts of the component auditor strategy. Now, when you look at the word component auditor, immediately you will see for this particular exams, the question was on group audits. That is why you must familiarize yourself with group audits. Because group audits is not just audited by one auditor. Sometimes they may have what we call component auditors to help the group auditor to perform an audit of financial statements. Okay, and there were also some other ethical issues because the client actually asked the auditor to do something else for them. So these are the makeup of the 50 marks, including the 4 professional marks. So the examiner was very kind to stick to their approach to keep it at planning stage. Now, in section B, likewise, they kept to their promise as well. One of the questions was on completion stage of an audit. Okay, so again, you need to know what people do to complete the audit. Like one of the things that auditors do to complete the audit is they always would need to discuss with the directors of the company regarding a list of proposed audit adjustments or uncorrected misstatements, because sometimes during audit, the auditors may find a lot of misstatements along the way. So they will accumulate a list of what we call uncorrected misstatements. And some of this needs to be adjusted by the directors of the company before the opinions are issued. So again, in this question, it was quite interesting because the students were asked to evaluate the matters to discuss with the management. Okay, so what do you mean by matters to discuss with the management? Okay, and what is the impact on the audit opinion if the management failed to adjust the errors? Okay, and of course, there were two other scenarios in the question 2 where you were given a scenario to deal with two ethical issues as well. So you can see ethics is quite popular, whether it is at the planning stage or even at the completion stage. Now, in question number 3, you were given scenario number 1, scenario number 2, but question 3 was more of the other assignments. You were asked to describe procedures to be performed on a PFI, and you may also need to consider professional and ethical issues, whether the audit firm should provide such an assignment to the client. And in scenario number 2, it was more of QC aspects. Okay, so you need to know what is wrong with the QC relating to that particular assignment or to that particular audit. Now, likewise, in December, it was the same thing. Okay, again, section A, good news, they gave you planning stage as well. But this time, you were asked to evaluate business risks. Okay, and you were asked to evaluate risks of material misstatement when developing strategy and plan. So again, my students always have this problem. They can't tell the difference between audit risks, business risks, and risks of material misstatement. Is it the same or is it different? And of course, when there is risks relating to the financial statements, your audit procedures will always be there as part of your planning stage. Okay? And obviously, again, like I told you earlier, there are ways to write out your answers and link it to make sure that you save some time. And of course, in this section A, you will also asked to consider whether you need to accept another engagement from another company. Okay, this is more of an ethical or professional issue kind of thinking. Okay, and you will also ask about assurance engagements. Okay, because usually in an audit of financial statements, the level of assurance that we provide is always high. But when you are providing a limited assurance kind of thing, the procedures that we do might be a bit different. So that's why this question actually asks the students whether an audit or a limited assurance could have uncovered the fraud, okay, in that company. Now, in the section B, likewise, there was a question on completion stage as promised. But this time, as a student, you were asked to audit going concern. And usually, part of the work of going concern is for the auditors to review the cash flow forecast of that company. So again, this is another form of other assignment, and this is more like, and the next part is on reporting on aspects of corporate governance. So based on the 2 exam sitting under the new format, the examiner has been kind. They have actually promised according to what they mentioned in the examiner's approach to AAA about the types of questions that will be coming up. And in question 3, they tested the students on other regulatory framework like money laundering, as well as professional and ethical issues. So looking at September and December, it doesn't seem hard. Perhaps the only challenge we have as a student doing AAA is more of Section A, because Section A has long case studies. And the other thing that I think we can be challenged in terms of doing A exams is the SPR part, remembering your accounting standards, because a lot of students can't remember the principles behind a lot of accounting standards, especially in terms of recognition criteria and measurement criteria as well. So at the end of the day, passing AA, you need a lot of components. Now, what else do you need to pass AA? Of course, your exam techniques. This is the part I would like to emphasize, because at the end of the day, you need to know how to write out your answers so that people will give you the marks, and perhaps to also understand questions requirements. Like I mentioned just now, some students of mine can't tell what's the difference between these 3. Okay, so sometimes your answers, you're confused. Sometimes you write your audit risk like business risks, and is it related? Should your answers be different? The way you present your answers, the way you read the case study, do you need to do it differently? Do you need to present your answers differently? And please, revise on your SPR as well as your lower level audit knowledge. Remember what I say about SPR, okay? If you want to do AAA, you can do SPR concurrently, or you can do AA after your SPR. But as usual, I will be preparing some SPR notes for you, some summary notes for you, so that you can refresh some of the important standards that are usually examinable on the AA. Thank you.